Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Refold Podcast. My name is Clayton, also known as George Pig, and I manage the community here at Refold. Today, we're joined by Koalani, and despite her fantastic American English accent, she is actually originally a speaker of Greek. So join us as we talk all about learning languages via immersion pre-internet and what it was like to learn English and Spanish via radio and comic books. All right, and Koalani, thank you so much for coming on the Refold Podcast today.
Thank you.
So, Koalani, you were put into contact with me by Crush, one of the Cantonese admins for the Refold Discord servers, and he spoke very highly of you. So you actually are kind of a polyglot, if I understand.
Yeah, I started learning languages when I was a kid. Actually, most of them, most of the languages that I speak now, I started learning as a kid. Well, I had plenty of time, so it was also easier than now. So yeah, I've been studying different languages. Not just from one family group.
Right. So you and Crush share a couple of kind of, I don't want to say obscure, but lesser learned languages. I believe you and he share Basque and Hawaiian as languages that you both are somewhat proficient in, especially Basque.
Yeah, I think he's better than me, but okay, we haven't spoken in Basque. But yeah, we're like an intermediate level. And Hawaiian, well, a little less, but yeah, okay. He has been on some of my classes, if I can call them that. It's just a meeting among learners to practice Hawaiian. So yeah, well, he also speaks Spanish, but that's not a minority language.
Right. He also is very good at Spanish. And you are too, I believe. So Spanish is one of your stronger languages, as
Yeah.
is English.
Well, yeah. Actually, I think my Spanish is even better than my English.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want to mention maybe what your actual native language is? So I think it'll surprise a lot of people.
Okay, it's Greek.
It's Greek.
Yeah.
So you're a native Greek speaker, but you could certainly fool me with your English. You sound very much like an American.
Thank you so much. Well, I as a kid, I watched a lot of TV, a lot of American TV shows. So thanks to them, I learned like Midwestern pronunciation of English.
So if we had to look at your languages, Greek is your native language, but you're also very strong at English, Spanish, Finnish, and Swedish. Is that right?
Yeah, well, those languages came a bit later because I started with Spanish when I was 10, English more or less also when I was 10 or 11. Then as a teenager, I started learning the other languages. Actually, I started with Dutch, but Dutch is a bit more difficult than Swedish, so I think my Swedish is better than my Dutch, although I started with Dutch earlier. Then I went to study in Finland, so that's why my Finnish is pretty strong too, although it's a very difficult language. And it's hard to learn, to be proficient in Finnish.
Interesting. And how did you? So what would you say your levels in these languages are? Have you taken any of the CEFR exams or anything?
Actually, I haven't because, well, when I studied them, those levels didn't exist yet. See, I learned them, a long time ago. I'm in my early 60s now, so I learned them in the 70s. So the modern classification of degrees and all that didn't exist back then. So no, I didn't take any exams. I just, passed an exam in Swedish in order to study Nordic languages at the University of Helsinki, and that's it. I wasn't even required to take an exam in Finnish because I wrote to the university in Finnish, and that was good enough back then. So
Very
I
interesting.
actually, yeah.
So you
So,
studied Nordic languages at university?
yeah, well, my major was Spanish. Then
Okay.
in Finland, I studied Nordic languages, so that covered all Nordic languages, all Scandinavian languages plus Icelandic. So Scandinavian languages are Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, and then Icelandic. Um, although Finland is a Nordic country, as a language, it's different. So it's not a Scandinavian language. So I studied that too, of course. And then I also studied Dutch in Stockholm, at Stockholm University.
Okay, very interesting.
So yeah, those are my best languages, except for Icelandic, because it's hard to practice Icelandic because there are so few people.
Yeah, I imagine. I don't know what's the population of Iceland? 500,000 maybe?
No, less. It's like 300.
Less?
Yeah, 320,000, or
Okay.
330,000 maybe by now. Yeah.
All
Not-
right. And so Crush, our mutual contact, he lived in Basque country for a while, which is sort of where he picked up Basque and he studied it there. How did you come in? So I'm not super surprised at somebody studying, the Scandinavian languages or even Finnish, because these are sort of national languages. But Basque is sort of like a regional minority language. How did you come into learning Basque?
Well, one of the teachers at the University of Helsinki spoke or had learned Basque. He was actually Finnish, but he had been to the Basque country, and he has stayed in a monastery there where Basque is taught. So he learned it, and he thought of putting together a course at the University of Helsinki. So I took it, and I liked the language, and I went for it. That was just a beginner's course. Then I went to the Basque country. I had a friend actually there, so he had me stay at his place so I could take a 1 month long course, and I did that twice. And after that, I bought a course to go on studying it alone. So yeah, it took me years, but there was no rush. So
Yeah, languages will always be there.
yeah.
It took me many, many years to get my grounds in my first foreign language. And languages will always be there.
Yeah. What's your first foreign language?
Well, the first foreign language that I sort of learned independently without any schooling was Filipino.
Filipino. Oh, why
and
learn Filipino?
yeah, so I used to be a forensic technician helping a pathologist sort of do autopsies and stuff. And it was never really my passion. It's just something I did. So I quit my job and I moved abroad to teach English. And I was in Latin America for a little bit. Then I was in like Taiwan for a little bit. Then I ended up in the Philippines. And I took that as an opportunity to learn the language. When I moved abroad, I didn't want to be one of those expats who like only speaks English and only lives in an English bubble. And it took me a good couple of years. I did textbooks, and at Refold, we really like input. We believe in like watching TV, listening to the radio, reading books. But at that time, Refold didn't exist, and it was a good couple of years before I actually read my first book in Filipino. So it took me a long time.
Yeah. Okay. So you also speak Spanish if you taught English in Latin America.
So I would not say I'm a Spanish speaker. I do not speak it to a high level. I
Well,
answer emails in Spanish for work.
mhm.
So, at our company, we sell like a couple of courses. We sell flashcards, and I would say a small majority, like 60% maybe, of our customers come from Spanish-speaking countries. One
Oh,
of our YouTube partners is Mr. Salas. He's a Spanish-speaking YouTuber. He's a polyglot. He's originally from Mexico. Um, and like I can offer refunds in Spanish and like have small, but I would say I am nowhere near like actual fluency. I'm not C1 or C2.
okay.
Um,
So your Filipino is better than your Spanish?
I would say so because I've worked with Filipino off and on for 7 years, whereas Spanish was something I did for a while, and I never really took it to a high level, I would say.
Okay. Well, it's
Um,
easy. So you can always pick it up if you go for it.
yeah, I'm currently listening to an audio book, Cada ver exquisito. It's an Argentinian book. I'm listening to the audiobook for it in Spanish, and I started back a couple of weeks ago. I said, I want to take my Spanish to the next level. I want to be able to actually do professional things in Spanish. So, how did you learn languages? So I know that you mentioned that you got your perfect sort of Midwestern American accent from TV, but did you apply that same sort of mindset to like learning Scandinavian languages and learning Basque? How did you do it?
Well, partly because I listen to the radio. I even before I started learning those languages, I would just listen to the radio without understanding anything. Well, Finnish, for instance, I didn't understand a single word in the beginning. Um, it likes it helps you. It helps you with pronunciation, intonation. Um, and then I did it for Spanish too. A lot more actually than because the radio station was stronger. The Spanish radio station was stronger. The signal was stronger, so I could listen to it with no static, nothing. And then shortwave. We had shortwave radios back then to listen to foreign stations. There was no internet in the 70s. So I had to use a radio, a shortwave radio to listen to those countries. So yeah, that helped a lot. But of course, I also used a book, a learning book to study the grammar, the vocabulary, everything. English, not really. The only English I got was school English, and you didn't really learn English at school. It was
Right.
pretty basic. Yeah. So I actually never studied English, not really. I just picked it up from TV.
Now, I'm not sure. So modern Greek has very recently undergone a language shift, I guess, and I think it might have been around the 70s. They had something called Kathravosa or something.
Oh yeah, Casarebusa.
Yeah. And was that
Casarebusa.
still taught in school when you were in school?
Oh yeah, and I had a big problem because actually, well, I haven't told you the whole story because my father was French. So actually, the first language I learned was French because, well, my mother was Greek, my father was French, and I was born in France. And my mother wouldn't, never bothered to teach me Greek. So I only spoke French up to the age of 2.5, something like that. And then they brought me to Greece to be raised by my grandmother, my mother's mother, who only spoke Greek. So I learned Greek with her, and I started forgetting my French. So that's why I said that my mother tongue is Greek, although it's not technically exactly so. Anyway, but then when I was six, I went to French school instead of Greek school. So yeah, my Greek was never really strong because I I I learned how to read Greek alone. Actually, thanks to Donald Duck comic books. Because when I was six, that was the first year that Donald Duck books were published in Greece. So yeah, that's how I learned how to read Greek.
I
And
think this is actually going to surprise a lot of Americans.
oh
I've
yeah,
heard that Donald Duck is really popular, his comic books, super popular in Europe. But in America, Donald Duck is sort of like a side character.
I know. The first time I went to the States, it was like I think back in 1994, was it? Yeah, I was expecting to see Donald Duck comic books everywhere. And I first went to the airport kiosk to the newsstand to buy Donald Duck, and I couldn't find a single one. I didn't understand what's going on. Then, I went to New York City. I went to the newsstands, nothing. I didn't understand. It was a big shock.
Yeah, Donald Duck comics are unheard of in the States, but they're very popular all across Europe.
Oh yeah, especially not so much in Spain, but in Greece and in Italy and in the Nordic countries, and in Holland and Germany, they were very popular. In France, very popular. There was at some point there were like 8 different comic books published every month. One every week, and then several different ones. One would be called Minnie Mouse, and it only had stories with Minnie. One would be called Phantom, only with Phantom Duck. Another one, Mickey Mouse, etc. Each
And you've
character would
totally
have.
lost me because I have no clue who Phantom Duck is.
Oh.
Uh, so uh, back to learning Greek. It's something you
So
spoke at
yeah,
home with your grandmother,
yeah.
and at the time they had this Ravosa, right, which was sort of like a
It's an
sort
older,
of classicalized Greek.
yeah,
It,
older kind of artificial Greek. Nobody spoke it. It was just, on TV, and books were written in Katarebusa. So school books were written in Katarebusa, and of course I didn't have a clue about Katarebusa because in Donald Duck comic books it was the Motiki, the spoken language. But then, after finishing the French school, elementary school, I was taken back to France. So I went to intermediate school there, again in French. But then when I was 15, I came back to Greece, and I went to Greek school for the first time. And yeah, I stumbled upon Kafarebus, and that was a shock because I had a hard time understanding it. um,
yeah, I guess like a sort of a comparison would be like, imagine if Spain used sort of like a Latinized version of Spanish.
yeah.
Um, I'm trying because I'm thinking about our listeners and like
Uh-huh.
how do we explain Catharevosa? Because it's sort of like an
Well,
artificial archaicized form of the language that they eventually dropped, I think, in the 70s.
I think later on. I
Okay.
think, it, yeah, it was later than that. I mean, totally
But
dropped.
it was sort of like a form of diglossia, right? You had your spoken Greek and your written Greek.
Yeah, it was something like that. And in Finland, there's a spoken language and a written language,
Right.
but the difference is smaller than between Katarebusa and Vimotiki. Um, it was actually hard because there were many different words. So if you didn't know the word, you had to look it up in the dictionary. And the verb forms were like archaic, a bit like ancient Greek. But of course, didn't have a clue about ancient Greek either. Yeah.
Greek is an interesting language in a lot of ways. Have you ever heard of carcinization?
Co- like carcinization?
Carcinization. It's
Carcinization?
it's
No.
something that happens in animals, like sea animals. They tend to turn into crabs. Over time, sea animals evolve to look like crabs. A
Oh,
lot of what we call crabs are not actually crabs; they just look like crabs.
really?
It's sort of like how like a shark and a dolphin look similar, but they're not related. Like they're not closely related.
Okay.
Uh,
No, I
I'm
didn't
I'm
know.
I'm 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 being long-winded here, but my point is that in Greek you have something called iotization, where all of the vowels turn into iota, e.
Okay, well, not all of them, but many of them.
Yeah, and
They're
that's
pro-
one of the
they're pronounced
yeah,
like E. Yeah.
they're pronounced like e, which
Uh-huh.
in English we say iota. Um,
Okay.
and
But
and
it's the sound E. That's why I'm saying E. It's a sound
yeah,
E. Mm.
uh, and I imagine that would be quite difficult. You were partially educated in French. You didn't have this background.
Oh yeah, it was a bit hard to learn how to spell correctly. Yeah, but I worked on it when I was 11 in France. I had my mother read to me. I subscribed to a Greek magazine, and I had my mother read to me, and I would write the text, and then I would compare to the written text, and I would correct my mistakes. So I actually managed to spell Greek pretty well.
And I have a very, very minor non-standard accent in my English, and I make spelling errors all the time. I can't imagine how I would fare in a language like Greek with back when you had what is it, the Demotic slash Katharavosa difference. Um,
We also had accents back then. I mean, different accents. So that made it even harder. But I managed to learn them. I had no problem with accents actually. But of course, they were abolished. Like when was it? Like 20 years ago, maybe more, 30 years ago. So we only have one accent like now, like Spanish, just to mark the stress.
gotcha.
Yeah.
And I I guess so. One thing I've heard, I've got actually very little exposure to Greek, is that it sounds a lot like European Spanish.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's
Uh,
actually one of the reasons why I was able to pronounce Spanish like a Spaniard because I had the Greek phonology to rely on, and then of course I had the French vocabulary to help me with with Spanish vocabulary. So that's why Spanish was pretty easy to me compared to English, which is a Germanic language. So it's actually harder to me.
yeah,
It doesn't come as natural to me as Spanish.
yeah. And I feel similar. The Germanic languages.
Uh,
The ver-
uh, I think you froze there for a while. And again, you're frozen. Can't hear you. Are you back?
I think I'm back.
Okay, you froze.
Can you see and hear me?
Yeah. Uh,
Okay.
okay. I got until I think the Germanic languages.
Right. And yeah, our Jafar is our video editor. I'll have Jafar edit this, so no worries. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, what I was saying was the Germanic languages, the verbs are very similar. German has In Dutch, they have the separable verbs. It reminds me of like the phrasal verbs in English.
And
Um,
so do Scandinavian languages.
okay. Uh, and we tend to have a lot of vowel sounds, like
Hmm.
a versus ah,
Hmm.
versus oo versus things like that. Um, so I can imagine you probably did have some issues going into the Germanic languages from Crete.
Yeah, yeah. Although Swedish and Norwegian felt really easy to me, even easier than English, I might say. Um, I don't know. Danish was a bit harder because of pronunciation, but
Just
yeah, well, not so much. Um, it's rather some of the consonants that were hard to imitate in the beginning, or actually not to imitate, but to understand Danes. That's the hardest part. Even now, if I speak with a Dane on the phone, I don't get it all. If it's on the phone, or if they are drunk or something, I don't get it all. I miss some of it. Yeah, but
I'm not surprised.
okay. But no, Norwegian and Swedish felt like easier than English. Maybe because I already spoke English, so it was more of the same with not so many idioms, so that's good. English has so many idioms, and even things that you don't call idioms, but to me they are idioms, because if you don't say it in a specific way, it doesn't sound English. It sounds odd. People don't use that form. That you know they use specific forms, and that's an idiom to me.
I feel like this is a sort of there's a generational gap with idioms in English. So I don't know if this is because I'm younger. I'm in my early 30s, but I feel like older people use far more idioms in English than younger people. And I don't know if that's true. I don't have any data on this, but um, I feel like younger people use fewer idioms. But I could
Really?
be totally wrong.
I would say that younger people use even more idioms.
You think so?
I think so. Or
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe though the same idioms weren't so, like ironclad in the past, and now they are. Maybe people spoke more freely in the past. There were more options. Now it's like there's only one option and everybody mimics it. I don't know. I,
Okay.
am I right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was actually thinking about an idiom, um, and I actually Googled it this morning, and the dictionary marked it as archaic. It's to tan someone's hide. Have you ever heard that?
To tan someone's hide. No,
Hmm.
no. I'm sorry.
No. Yeah, it's okay. I heard it all the time growing up in the countryside. It means to beat someone. Um,
Oh,
like
but
tanning, like leather, and hide like skin. Tan a hide. I guess they to tan hide they beat it. Um,
oh,
and like things like that. To me, that reminds me of how old people speak. They use a lot of idioms that I
okay.
like.
But I wasn't talking about that kind of idioms. That's more like a standard expression, or okay, that's something you have in other languages. But in English, it's like there's only one way people use to say anything, pretty much anything. If you say it in another way, it doesn't sound English, or it sounds odd. That's what I mean. Whereas in other languages, it's more free. Language is more free. It's like, doesn't matter how you say it. It's still Norwegian, or it's still Swedish. Um, like, I'm having dinner. If you say I'm eating dinner, it sounds odd. It's not used.
Yeah, maybe I'm having dinner. I'm not sure. I've actually never thought about that.
Oh, I have to think
Um,
about that all the time.
yeah. Now, I know that older people where I'm from, dinner is lunch.
Oh,
Um, so I
okay.
do know that. That's a
I think this is how it was in the Scandinavian countries too in the past.
yeah. So you can say something like dinner's on the table and supper's cooking. Because dinner would be lunch, and then supper would be dinner.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Yeah,
at least in the countryside. I'm from the countryside, from the middle of nowhere, and that was the case when I was growing up.
yeah. Yeah, but it was just to illustrate what I mean by idiom. It's just anything you say.
Right.
It's like there's a standard way of saying it, and everybody says it that way, and if you change the verb, it's not used. It's like it sounds off.
Right.
That's what I mean by
Yeah.
idiom in English.
Yeah. It's not a creative process. Everybody has a set way of saying something, pretty much, is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Okay, so you recognize what the phenomenon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that might be the case. Yeah. Now, with with your languages, you have learned at least two non-Indo-European languages to some degree, maybe even three. I'm not sure what your Hawaiian level is. You've got Basque, Finnish, and Hawaiian.
Okay, and Sami. I also studied Sami at the university.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And with Sami, isn't it actually more like a cluster of languages?
Well, okay, I only learned, there are many languages,
Mhm.
and within each language, there are many dialects. So you can't learn them all. I just learned north, northern Sami, or yeah,
Okay.
northern Sami. That's the standard language of the northern part of Lapland, or Sami.
Okay, interesting.
Does
So
everybody
that's
know what
so you
Sami is?
got yeah. Sami is for our listeners. It's sort of it's one of the indigenous languages or groups of languages, and then like the far north of Finno-Scandia, right? So the far north of Norway, Sweden, and Finland.
And Russia.
Oh, and Russia. Yes, that's right. Um, and I think actually, yeah, that makes sense. I guess Russia has that whole thing with like it used to be Karelia, part of Finland.
Yeah,
Um,
that
yeah,
was another language. Yeah, that
yeah.
is being lost, I think now. Is it?
Oh, yeah. I'm not. I don't know. Yeah, there are a couple of these Finnic languages that descend from like medieval or early modern Finnish. Um, I think there are some in
Yeah.
Norway also as well.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
not really sure.
yeah. Some early settlers from or immigrants that came from Finland and kept their old-fashioned Finnish, and then it's a bit altered compared to the past, but it's still an older form of Finnish. Yeah,
Yeah.
man kieli. It's called man kieli, which means our language in Finnish. But that's what
Okay.
that dialect is called. Yeah.
Yeah, and for some period of time, I think there was actually uh, some Finnish in the northern U.S.
Oh yeah, I heard about it. Yeah, the immigrants there.
Yeah, I think like Michigan.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah,
there are many Scandinavians or Nordics there. Minnesota, maybe. Mm.
maybe Minnesota or Michigan.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah. There were also people from
interesting.
Iceland.
Yes, for sure.
Mhm.
And I think there were also people from Iceland who settled in Canada.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
They
what is it sort of like comparing your experience with these Indo-European languages and these non-Indo-European languages? So Basque, um, Sami, Finnish, Hawaiian.
Uh-huh. Well, of course, since my native tongue is Indo-European. Of course, those other languages are harder to me, much harder. Um, Even Hawaiian, which looks easy, it isn't. Um,
So Hawaiian is an Austronesian language. It's a Malayo-Polynesian language. So it's like a cousin to Filipino, but it's like a very distant cousin. So I
yeah,
actually know very little about it. If I squint my eyes, I can make out cognates here and there, but that's it.
no, okay. Well, I would say that the difficult part of Hawaiian is that there are many words that for each notion, for each term, and each word means many things, many different things. And then there are many small words which look alike or are the same and mean different things and are used for different things. um, Plus, the grammar is totally different. You have to get used to a whole different mindset.
Yeah, I
So,
think my vague understanding about Hawaiian is they have this concept of alienability or something, alienable versus inalienable possession. So
okay,
like,
that's common to all Polynesian languages. I studied a bit of Samoan too, so it has the same thing. And I think Tahitian. I listen to Tahitian radio because I like the music. So, um, yeah, I I read
right,
actually read a guide, a language guide on all Polynesian languages. So all of them has this notion of inherent and non. You called it something else.
I think I said inalienable.
Inalienable.
Alienable versus
Okay.
like your hand is different than your wife or your husband or something. Like the possession, right, is like inherent,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. Because you don't have a choice with your hand,
right,
and whereas your husband, you choose them, and your
right,
child, you choose to have a child. Um, but your father and mother, according to Hawaiian thinking, you don't choose them. Yeah, but
yeah. So
yeah, it's more
with
extended than that. It's not just body parts and family members. It's also the clothes you wear. They are considered part of you. Although you choose them, they are part of you. So it falls under the same category as your parents and your body parts. And your car, same thing. You're part of it. You're inside it. So you're like part of it.
yeah, and with Hawaiian, uh, what do you do for content? Like, do you interact with mostly like first speakers, like native language speakers, or do you read books, or um, how do you
Well,
engage with the language?
okay, well, I started learning Hawaiian a long time ago. It's not recent. It was like in the late 90s with a book, Let's Speak Hawaiian. So I finished the book many times and I still couldn't speak it because there was practically no internet then. At least it wasn't possible for me to find anybody on the internet to speak Hawaiian with. And so I bought more books as they were published. More books to not books to read, not reading books, but textbooks to learn the language. And each book would offer a different aspect, different words, or it explained the grammar differently, so it helped. So that's how I gained more confidence. I must have studied like 6, 7, 8 or more textbooks and grammar books up until like a couple of years ago when I discovered Duolingo. So I had actually stopped reading any Hawaiian for many years. So I had forgotten a lot of it. So thanks to Duolingo, I brushed it up, and I discovered events and the Duolingo events, and that those were meetings of learners. So I took part to the Hawaiian meeting. There was just one. The host was an American guy who had learned Hawaiian, so his Hawaiian wasn't better than mine. um, he didn't really speak it. So yeah, the meeting was basically in English. But in spite of that, and we spoke very little Hawaiian, next to none, I must say, in those meetings. But in spite of that, that helped me to learn to start speaking Hawaiian. The little bit of practice that I got, launched my Hawaiian. Um, so after that, a few months ago, I discovered another gathering that is done by Hawaiians, native native speakers, and they will just speak among with each other, and we can attend. It's an online meeting, and we speak very little, but then they ask us if we have any question, or they ask us one question each meeting, and then we get to speak some Hawaiian. So that helps to actually listen to native speakers and try to understand. It's not easy. So that's what I basically do, and I'm actually right now I'm reading more textbooks and grammars that I found online. I printed them out and I'm reading them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you meet with some native speakers and some other learners. You read textbooks. Do you ever engage with literature, oral histories, oral stories, books?
Not really, but I got some books from Crush, so I could start reading them. But of course, in those textbooks that I have, there are plenty of Hawaiian stories, mythology stories, plenty of them. So it's not like I haven't read any of it. No, I have plenty of them. They are hard, but of course, the English translation helps. Some of the stories are not translated. I could still, understand them thanks to the, the dictionary that I have. I bought 2 dictionaries. One of them is pretty big, so it helps. So when I start really, when my level goes up in a language, I do read stories or websites or whatever I get my hands on. Actually, if Donald Duck is a number 1 option.
Right.
Yeah.
Something tells me that Donald Duck is not in Hawaiian.
No, unfortunately. I wonder why.
Yeah, the integration of the Kingdom of Hawaii into America is the reason. They're American, and we Americans just don't do Donald Duck comics for some reason. I don't know why. They sound pretty great.
Yeah. Well, of course, there's a dark part and all of that, but I don't mind because I know about it, so I know I can recognize it, so it doesn't affect me because I know what it is. If you don't know what it is, if you're a child, then of course, yeah, it can affect you.
For sure.
Mm.
Now, with these sort of marginalized languages like Northern Sami, Basque, Hawaiian, how does that compare? When you learn Finnish, you've got the national government, right? The state government of Finland supporting the language. You can go to university, for example, in Finnish if you wanted to, I'm sure. Whereas I imagine that's not the case with say Northern Sami.
No, we did have a lesson. It was like a couple of hours every week, but the teacher wasn't really a teacher. She was a native speaker, so she couldn't really teach. So yeah, it was up to us to really learn the language. review the grammar and try to make out what the stories were about, the stories that we read. So yeah, it doesn't help. It's harder. You got less resources. Of course, now you have the Sami radio. So I tried to listen to the Sami radio from Finland and from Sweden. But still, it's not all day long. It's just a few hours a day, and they will switch between Sami and Swedish or Sami and Finnish. It's bilingual, and the Norwegian part, when they speak Sami, but are the ones who live in Norway, their Sami is affected by the national language, by Norwegian, and the ones who live in Finland, well, their Sami is affected by it or influenced by Finnish. And it's the same thing in Hawaiian. Native Hawaiians will use English words in between, like but, so. It's crazy. I mean, to me, it's crazy. I never do that. Why can't they? I don't know. If they're native speakers, why are they so stuck? I mean, so influenced by English. It's crazy.
That happens. That happens.
Yeah.
That definitely happens, and
even pronunciation. Okay, native speakers don't really. I don't know. I think that like the K's and the T's and the P's in Hawaiian shouldn't be aspirated, but people do aspirate them, like in English. I think that's an English influence.
Yeah. I have heard. So the Philippines is another case where there's a high level of bilingualism with English, and I've heard the English R, which is not a native sound, and I've heard some people with their aspirated stops, like tongue, pup.
Really? In
Yeah.
Philippines?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see.
So I think, this must be sort of something that happens under language contact.
And then I noticed that Samoans, they actually have a British accent when they speak English. Well, their T's sound like British T's, like t almost, not like American T. When they speak Samoan, they use the same T, the British T. I think that comes from British English.
Right, that super aspirate almost sounds like an affricate kind of sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And English, I mean, even Dutch has American English, the American R. You know that, right?
Yes, yeah. They call it the hoisa air. I think.
Okay, at the end of words.
At the end of a word, they.
Yeah, or before a stop, like board.
Nar.
And even Swedish and Norwegian, they have this retroflex sound, and it sounds like American R, like barn.
Okay. Yeah. Child.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of, I guess, language contact, but some of those things could be native. I don't know. In terms of like the rhotics, I feel like.
I don't think this was so strong in the Swedish spoken back in the 50s, because I've seen some old movies, older Swedish movies, and it sounded different, a bit different. They spoke more slowly and more clearly, and I don't think this retroflex sound was as pronounced as it is now. It's getting more American, definitely.
Yeah. So you mentioned Samoan. You mentioned Hawaiian. My question is, do Tahitians sound French? Is there like a French accent in their
Yeah, yeah. It's like the intonation. Sometimes they will stress words on the last syllable, um, or they will have like a singing intonation. Um, Yorana, like bonsoir, which
Gotcha.
is good night. Yorana is hi or good day, good morning. It's everything. But they say Yorana, like they say bonsoir.
Have
So
you gotten the chance to listen to much uh, of the variation in Hawaiian?
the variation, what
The
variation?
variation, so like the dialects of Hawaiian.
Oh, well, not much, but those teachers that host the meeting are from Ni'ihau, which is the oldest, um, still preserved, let's say, fully preserved Hawaiian
There's
dialect.
there's still majority, like a lot of Hawaiians outside of Niihau
Hmm.
don't speak Hawaiian as like their main driver, their daily driver. Um, okay, so you get to hear their variety. I hear that K and T are kind of slippery for them.
When you say slippery,
They're kind of
what?
like variations of each other. Like they might say Kanaka or Kanata. They might, they treat them as like allophones of each other.
Uh-huh. I think that I'm not sure about those two teachers. I think their K sounds like a pretty neutral K, but there are some other people who are native speakers who just want to practice their Hawaiian. Um, and I've also seen videos. I think the original Hawaiian K is a lot like Greenlandic Q. Have you heard it?
I go, oh,
Yeah, it's more like that. Not as pronounced as in Greenlandic, but still kanaka, like a bit like that. Because there's a guy there who's native who has this K, and I've heard it in many videos. Not in Americans who learn Hawaiian. No, they can't. You can't say that. Or they.
yeah, the sort of neo-Hawaiian. Another thing is I think Hawaiian has this V sound, and a lot of Americans who learn Hawaiian pronounce it like a V, but it's not really a V.
Well, according to an old book that I'm reading now, it depends if the word starts with a W or if it's in the middle. So at the beginning, it should be like between wa and va, but then in the middle, it's like a V, according to that book. But then even native speakers interchange. So I guess there's no standard rule anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
S- yeah. So I imagine, how would you say Hawaii in Hawaiian?
Hawaii.
Hawaii. Yeah. Okay.
But you know what I
Yeah.
noticed from those Ni'ihau native speakers when they speak Hawaiian? They actually use more loans from English than the university Hawaiian that we are taught. Like we are more purists than they are. Like for instance, we say for salad we say okay, university Hawaiian says lau ai, but they will say saleta, salad, and many words like that, loans from English. So yeah, I don't. Puzzling.
Yeah. So this is actually very interesting because you see something similar with Filipino, where you've got like three levels of vocab. You've got native vocab, you've got Spanish vocab, and you've got English vocab. And you definitely have this tendency where people who learn Filipino as a second language prefer the indigenous vocab, whereas a native speaker is just as likely to grab a Spanish or an English word,
Uh,
even when a native word exists.
okay. It sounds sophisticated to them,
Yeah.
of course, not to us. Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I think
Well, Scandinavians will even use English words when they speak in between Danish or Norwegian or Swedish or English expressions. You name it. Like they will speak Norwegian and they will say you name it or whatever. Anyway, things like that. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I did not know that. I've had very little interaction with Scandinavians.
Oh, okay. Well, they do.
A long time ago, I used to travel, and you could always tell if Scandinavians had been somewhere, because people did not recognize the snus tins, the little tins. So I would travel in hostels, and I would see the people at the hostel put the snus tin in the lost and found, because they weren't aware, like, oh no, that's just garbage. That's somebody's empty snus. They're not actually. So you could always tell that there had been Scandinavians because you would see in the lost and found.
I'm sorry, I missed what they found. What they put in the lost and found? The what? The snow?
The little snus. The snus. It's like tobacco. Comes in a can.
Oh, the sniff.
Yeah.
Well, but why would they put it in the lost and found?
Well, because people in like Latin America, they just see it. They're like, somebody left this here, and they'll put it in the lost and found, even if it's like garbage. So you could always. I remember traveling through Latin America, and I could see like General and all the different like brands of tobacco, and I was like, okay, Scandinavians have been here because.
Okay, because it's common to sniff in Scandinavia. Oh,
yes.
Okay.
And the people at the hostel didn't recognize, oh, that's garbage. That's somebody's old can.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I've had very, very little interactions as an American from the middle of nowhere with Scandinavians.
Is Kentucky in the middle of nowhere?
It feels that way sometimes.
Okay. Do you live in the countryside?
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I'm from an unincorporated community that has about 300 people.
Wow.
Total. Yeah.
Oh, it's like a village.
A village makes it sound nicer because we're spread out.
Okay.
You have to drive really far to see somebody's, house. So yeah, it's very much.
Yeah. So it's the same concept as Los Angeles. You have to drive to get anywhere you want.
Yeah, I'm not a super huge fan. Koalani, we are about at time. Before we go, I wanted to give you the stage. I've got two questions for you. The first one is there anything that I didn't bring up that you wanted to talk about, that you wanted to say a few words on?
No, I don't think so. Well, I didn't mention that I also tried to learn Greenlandic, but it didn't work out. It was too difficult. But I did try it out. Turkey also, too difficult.
I have a client who I coach who is learning Ojibwe, which is polysynthetic, like Greenlandic.
Okay.
But unfortunately, I don't speak any indigenous languages.
No, yeah. Well, I think all of them are more or less pretty hard.
And the second thing before we go is what is your parting advice to the listeners? When it comes to language learning, what would your one piece of sage wisdom be?
Only one thing. Listen to the radio or the TV or a podcast or whatever. You got lots of options now. It really helps. You internalize the language without realizing it. The next thing you know, you start speaking it.
And Koalani, am I saying that right?
Sure, yeah. That's Hawaiian,
okay.
By the way.
Yeah. Okay. It's Hawaiian. Thank you so much for coming on, and it was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I wish you the best for your business and everything you're involved in.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Refold Podcast. If you're watching the live premiere, you're in luck. Right as it ends, we have an after party over on the Refold Central Discord server. Come join us by using refold.link/join and chat about the episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to hear more, you can find older episodes to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. Let us know what you thought about the video by liking and leaving a comment below. Do you have suggestions for upcoming visitors or requests for particular topics? Please feel free to reach out to me on Discord at GeorgePig #5413 or via email at clayton@refold.la. Thank you all for watching and or listening, and I'll see you next week.